You're listening to The Big Lift, the podcast of Web Trends Optimize, the CRO solution that enables marketers and developers to maximize the ROI on their digital properties. Web Trends Optimize is a powerful, feature-rich and easy-to-use solution, all delivered within a fixed-price contract with no additional cost for increased functionality ever. During these podcasts, we meet some of the key influencers within the marketing and conversion world to understand their roles and examine their challenges. Today, I'm in conversation with Mark Bainbridge, a very experienced senior marketer with a career spanning over 30 years. From working with the British Army to a plethora of startups, Mark shares some highlights of his career with me, and also why his most recent venture, Dragonfly AI, could be the answer to all content marketers' prayers. So Mark, I've just been looking through your LinkedIn profile and gone back a few years and noticed that you were, for around 10 years, the CMO for the British Army. That sounds like a really interesting role. Could you tell me how you ended up with it and, what did you do as part of that? And was it any different to the kind of roles you've had subsequently?
Wow, it was a fantastic 10-year period. I'd say, looking back on it, I think probably one of the career high points that I've had. How I got into it, it was a chance ad, I think, in The Guardian back in the day. It was probably circa late 90s. Yeah, no, so I started for them looking after regional territory. It's the first time they'd actually brought civilian marketing professionals into the sort of civil service MOD mix. So we were a bit of a kind of a test case to guinea pigs, if you like, to see whether it was likely to work. I looked after an enormous patch of the UK, which went from Cumbria across Wales and down into Cornwall. And I did that for about 10 months. And it was really interesting because, of course, it was a reasonably well-funded activity. Army branding, army recruitment and corporate communications is a very significant part of their agenda. Obviously, they need to fill the business with lots of really good quality people. But also, at the time, we were wrestling with a number of sort of wider political issues, ultimately leading into something called Optelic, which was the move into Iraq initially. So there were lots of really interesting drivers. So it was a unique marketing role in the sense that it was unlike anything I'd ever done before, but actually bringing the disciplines of marketing to a business like that was phenomenally interesting. It took about 10 years ultimately to kind of build a total sort of network solution. But I did 10 months out in the sort of what they call Wales and the West, which strangely included the Northwest. And then I spent another probably 9 years running it from the centre. And they previously had a full army colonel running it, who was a lovely chap, but not a marketing professional. And, I came in and sort of lifted the lid and thought, goodness me, we've got quite a lot of work to do. So incredibly well funded, an amazing client in the sense that they are by nature brave and able to take calculated risks. So we were able to do some really interesting stuff. And it was everything from the high street recruiting offices to the above the line TV campaigns and everything that sat between in terms of the digital context. So an amazing 10-year period. I worked with some phenomenal people as well.
And were you actually reporting into people within the army?
Yeah, I formed up part of what was called the ATRA Recruiting Group Board, which the Army loves its kind of committee titles. It probably had an acronym as well, which I'm afraid I can't remember. But Basically, I was the only civvy on a board of gnarly old sort of officers, basically, and they were great. I mean, they respected me for my professional creds, and I respected them for theirs. I mean, really incredible collaboration. I worked for, I think, 5 or 6 different commanders of the organisation during that period, because obviously they rotate every couple of years, and I was the continuity. So I had 10 years of knowledge ultimately about what worked and what didn't work so well. So yeah, I became quite a significant part of that world. Very hard to leave ultimately, but I thought 10 years doing something, it was probably time for a bit of a change.
Yeah, some years ago, I was working with the RAF, and I know the protocols are quite strong in there, and people used to salute you as you came in because somebody incorrectly gave me a name badge with the word lieutenant in front of it.
Mm.
And as soon as they saw that, they were all saluting. And I wasn't the lieutenant, but it was nice to be kind of recognised everywhere you went in, as people would stand up and salute you. I'm assuming the same sort of thing was going on in the army around the time that you were there.
Yeah, they had to give you a nominal rank Otherwise, they didn't really know how to talk to you because I was this kind of strange, civilian sitting in their kind of green world. So yeah, they gave me a nominal rank, and I was then sort of fated accordingly. I think I always sat slightly uncomfortably with me the idea that by title you should be shown a specific deference. But I kind of generally would introduce myself as Mark and say, please call me Mark, and value me on what I can contribute as opposed to the title I bring.
But it made a difference to eating in the officer's mess or not, didn't it?
Oh, yes, goodness me. I mean, I remember some fairly awkward moments where actually I would take, my team on a visit to, say, another command headquarters. It came to lunchtime and half of them were whisked off to the sergeant's mess. And I found that slightly uncomfortable because as far as I'm concerned, they're all equal contributors to my world. But the army had this very clear distinction between officers and other ranks and wouldn't allow the two to mix.
Yeah, very strange. But how did it help you in your career beyond that? And was it much different to what you experienced in roles later on?
So I think it was probably the role in which I had the most latitude ever. So I won't go into detail of how much, but we had a very significant budget. And I was basically given pretty much control over that. Obviously, I had budget managers and people to make sure that we stayed within the tram lines of the protocols required. But ultimately, it was a phenomenal train set to play with, and we had an incredibly good time doing it. And most importantly, I think we solved every problem they gave us and built world-class teams in doing it. And against the backdrop of that 10-year period, which went from to Iraq to Afghanistan, there were a number of very, very significant operational high points in that, and obviously with that a lot of frankly death and injury. So it made the job that much more real. And I suppose in a sense, when you're responsible for that level of output in your marketing, you think very differently, I think, about what you're doing, because there's clearly a sort of moral value to how you're communicating, as well as the effectiveness of delivering best practice.
And did those morals stay with you for the rest of your career so far?
I like to think so.
That's good.
Yeah, I mean, I think what was always really great about the army, and I kind of talk about the army as a client effectively, because I sort of sat there as a embedded contractor consultant, was they were very black and white about what they liked and what they didn't like. They were very, if you earned their trust and respect, they would allow you headroom to do whatever you needed to. And I think that is probably a set of rules and codes that I haven't seen sort of in the corporate sector quite so much. I mean, once in a while you'll meet somebody with those kind of innate leadership skills, but I mean, basically every person you deal with in the army is trained to a professional level, which makes them very, very straightforward to deal with generally. And it's either a yes or a no. There's no prevarication, and they don't change their mind.
Almost since that time, I won't say it's been exactly that time, but you've now been involved in a number of startups. I could almost say that you're a prolific founder of startups. So what's the attraction of doing that?
Well, I spent 30 years ultimately brand side and enjoyed it all in different ways. But at the end of the day, brands are set within fixed tram lines. You have an operating context where you can do some amazing work, but ultimately you can't change the colour of it and you can't change the ultimate direction of travel. With a startup, it's completely different. I mean, I love the variety. I suppose I quite enjoy the riskiness of it, because if you knew half of what went on in a startup, and I'm sure you do from your own experiences, you probably wouldn't dash into it. But at the same time, it's an amazing ride. The most important thing I found is you've got to choose the right colleagues to work with. And I've had fingers burned, working with some, frankly, fairly disingenuous people. But getting the right team together, a bunch of partners who you can put your trust in, and you feel you really complement each other's experience is vital. But at the same time, what it gives you is that ability to believe that you can do anything. And I think the concepts I've worked with in terms of startups have all been built around solving a problem in a market. And as a former brown person, I look at some of this technology that's emerging now, some of which we're involved with and some of which we just stumble across as we kind of do what we do. And I just think, how amazing it would be back in the day if I'd had a line of sight to a lot more of this. The reality is, when you're a senior marketer sitting in a big brand, the chances of you stumbling across a clever startup and being able to access and use them, given corporate governance and the relatively sort of shakiness of quite a lot of startups, is it's very hard to connect big brands with really incredible new emerging technologies. So I think part of my sort of motivation is drawn from the fact that I know basically how to connect those two worlds together to a degree.
Your latest venture is Dragonfly AI.
Mm.
And firstly, I'm intrigued as to where the name came from. And secondly, what does Dragonfly AI offer?
Great. Well, I love that. So Dragonfly's story started actually about 2010, so it's been around for a little while. It was originally a research project that came out of Queen Mary University, and they were looking to give robotic devices human interpretation skills, so the ability to use what we call the precognitive state of the brain, the system one thinking within the brain, which is basically the biological functions. And what they're trying to do is to kind of draw from it effectively the visual decision making that the brain makes in the zero moment of truth. So this piece of research they conducted lasted for about 4 or 5 years. At the end of it, they came back to market and said, we've got the mathematical formula that the brain uses in that zero moment of truth to prioritize, what draws our attention. We were working for a company called Black Swan Data at the time. And Black Swan really liked this and said, well, look, we can help to productize this. So they did, and that's where the journey started. The chief executive of Black Swan is an amazing guy called Steve King. I love Steve. He's a serial genius innovator, and he's built Black Swan to incredible level of success. He's also a very staunch Welshman, and he set us the task of giving the product a name. It's originally called, I think, Design Navigation Analysis, DNA, which was probably a little bit too obvious.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, it needs a new name. So we racked our brains for names, and we came up with all sorts of clever ones which deleted vowels and still made sense in terms of their audible presence. But eventually we came up, and somebody just said, it's a bit like a dragonfly's eye, it's multifaceted. Actually, dragonfly is nothing like the way that a dragonfly sees. But Steve heard dragonfly, and he said, I love that. Dragons, they're Welsh. And that's how it started. So we've got Dragonfly. Our heritage is thanks to Steve.
So what does it offer?
So what it is, it's a suite of products which basically allow us to use that algorithm that the brain uses in the zero moment of truth. It commutes the algorithm into a heat map, and it shows us instantly where the attention priorities are in any content we see. So it's predictive analytics. It shows us in advance what human beings are going to see when they see our content. So we think that's a really powerful proposition.
You mentioned zero moment of truth. Can you elaborate on what that means?
So in the process of engagement with, let's take content as the example, because that's what we sort of specialize in content performance optimization, is when the human being engages with a piece of content, the zero moment of truth is basically the biological process the brain is going when it's ingesting visual content. So we're separating system one, which is those kind of biological processes, from system two, which is our kind of top-down processing. So our kind of, the things that define us as human, our emotional response, our learned behaviors. So Dragonfly doesn't operate in that space. We don't do emotion at all. What we do is that zero moment of truth, that instantaneous view of what the brain is basically prioritizing from the content we see.
Okay, so how does the Dragonfly AI product suite compare with things like iQuant and maybe even Hotjar?
Yeah, so it does a different job, but the outputs will look similar. So Hotjar primarily is sort of looking at live web sessions and how people are using your digital assets. So that performs a very important job, but it's kind of post-cognitive. It's looking at what people are doing when they're on your site. iQuant do another slightly different job, which is basically they take your content and they compare it to a big battery of similar content in the cloud, and they come back and say, this is how content of your type typically performs, therefore this is how yours is likely to perform. What we do is we analyze uniquely with incredible precision, because we use the actual brain algorithm as the core of our IP, which allows us to see exactly what we see in any unique content instance. So, we're not comparing, we're not looking at sessions, we are predicting what human beings are going to see when they see your content.
I was talking to David Mitchell, one of your co-founders, the other day, and he mentioned this phrase, predictive visual analytics.
Mm-hmm.
Is that how you're encapsulating this predictive rather than descriptive analytics?
Yeah, so I think what our differentiation is really is we can see in advance using this formula, because we know this is how the brain kind of processes content, basically what we're going to see, as opposed to looking at what people are telling us they've seen, or how typically similar examples influence the way that we're likely to respond. So we're quite different in that sense.
It's interesting that you mentioned in your last couple of sentences that you don't do emotions, or you don't. I think that was the phrase that you used. Don't do emotions.
Yeah, we don't do emotion. Yeah,
But actually, visual cues trigger emotions. So
they do.
if you say you don't do emotions, where do you kind of stop from a point of view? Because I would say that anything on a page will trigger an emotion of some sort.
Yeah, so in this notion that we're predictive, we analyze content before it's published. So we still care about what catches the eye, not just the parts of a design that's clicked on. Um, we definitely differentiate on things like speed, so we're able to do what we do really fast. So we can analyze more content more quickly, and that's opened up opportunities which also help us to differentiate. I think I'm right in saying we're the only business in our kind of sector at the moment that can analyze video motion content. We can also, using our mobile application, allow real-time use of camera streams, and that enables us to sort of take it in store, for instance, and see how things are performing off shelf. So we're quite distinctly different. The emotional piece we think is still significant. We wouldn't for a minute say that's not important, but in a world that has so much content, the ability to be able to cut through all of that instantly and see what your consumer is seeing, we think is vital, because it's helping to understand if you have a 6-point communications hierarchy you're trying to deliver, and Dragonfly shows you that 4 out of those 6 content items are effectively out of view from that human visual context in the zero moment of truth, then you have a problem. Now, at best will in the world, you are very unlikely to be able to spot that just by looking at it. And one of the most important things that Dragonfly does, it kind of takes the human bias out of creative decision making, enables us to make judgments based on what's actually working. And we see this in our kind of client responses, that the improvements they see to the communications and the effectiveness of their content in lots of different contexts is improved quite dramatically. So we're not talking about sort of little fractional percentile improvements, which may or may not be attributable to Dragonfly. We see pretty whacking great, changes. So I can, come on and talk about a few of those in a moment, if that's useful to you.
Yeah, I think that would be very good to be able to talk about actual real life case studies, if you like.
Yeah, cool. So I'll take one. I mean, obviously, I'll steer off talking about brand names,
Okay.
but we're working with a big utilities company. Obviously, they've got millions of customers in the UK. During the lockdown, their digital traffic obviously was significant. They had a payments option. There were 3 options on their payments page. One was a self-service direct debit function. Another was a web agent, and the third was a call center jump off. Now, call centers and web agents obviously cost them in terms of call minutes and time. So their ideal is that they drive people to the direct debit sign up. So they use Dragonfly basically to optimize that direct debit feature within the site to make sure that it was really clearly seen and easy to find. And they improved direct debit sign-ups in the space of about 4 weeks by 34%, which is phenomenal. It's not, as I say, it's not like a little 1 or 2% increment. It was a huge sea change for them.
So the correlation between what somebody sees and what somebody clicks, is that part of Dragonfly AI's remit to be able to say, actually, if you're seeing this first and it's a button, that's the one they're likely to click first?
So what Dragonfly doesn't do is tell you what to do. Dragonfly shows instantly what the human brain is seeing. Now, we as we onboard our clients, we train them in methodologies which we've learned from our experiences of working with the solutions. But it doesn't have a kind of magic button that you press and it tells you exactly what to do. It'd be great if it did, and maybe it will in due course, but at the moment, no. So we see it as a kind of unbiased sort of aid to the decision-making process. So rather than having to stop with your creativity, maybe run a human panel or some other form of research to see what's happening, you can instantly, and it really is instant, you can instantly literally touch a button and it will show you your heat map, and you can apply metrology layers to it. And it has a whole series of metrics which we think are really valuable. So local attention scores, which enable us to see where these sort of 5 or 6 high points of attention are. We can show how digestible content is. So metrically, we can see whether your content is overcomplicated. We can look at share of attention. So if you were trying to work out, say, a digital view where the attention was shared across, say, 5 or 6 assets in view, it will tell you what proportionality they would share. And then the one which certainly in our Google Chrome extension people really like is called probability of perception. And this is basically showing you what consumers are likely to see. And it gives regional scoring, so we can see how those priorities are being delivered. So almost we can see the sequencing that people will look at content in your digital assets.
So if you are leading people to say this is where people might look, then it's down to perhaps UX design or maybe even CRO to be able to determine whether that does have an influence on clicks and ultimately conversions. Would that be right?
Totally. So I mean, it's benign AI in the sense that it's working in parallel with human decision making. So it helps to make good CRO decisions. It doesn't replace people. I think that's really important because a lot of AI, I think, is treated with a degree of suspicion that it's going to ultimately, replace creative processes. Ours doesn't. It augments. So it helps us to see instantly what's going on, and that in itself enables us to test hypotheses. I mean, a number of our agency clients use it for pitch validation. If they have a route they really like and they've proved it through Dragonfly, they've also got not just the subjectivity of isn't this amazing, but also the practicality of, and this is how it works specifically.
So could you go into a little detail? You said it was a suite of products. Other than the actual visual heat map that you can see, what else does it deliver?
So we have a product suite. So we have an iOS version, which allows us to deploy it to an iPhone or an iPad. So that allows us to use the real-time camera feature, so we can actually run the metrology live. We can pull from a URL, and we can pull from the camera roll and A/B test in the app. So we've got the app version. That's where it started. Now we see the app pretty much as the kind of companion to the Studio, which is our web app, so basically our desktop version, which allows us to run, multiple projects. It does everything that the iOS app does, plus it has some other really interesting features. In terms of metrology, we can look at the local attention scores. We can look at a monochromatic version. So if we've got very complex colorways in design, we can take away all of those and look at it monochromatically. That sometimes gives us visual cues. We can do the heat mapping. We can do region analysis, so we can basically mark up blocks of content and see how they score as regions. So if you're looking at, say, a banner ad and you've got 6 to 7 components on it, it'll help you to understand the priority in which people are seeing them. Also, we're learning things about the range of scores. So we score only everything on a scale of 0, which is no salience, to 100, which is the highest. So ideally, the things you really want your consumers to see should be scoring up in the sort of the 80s and 90s. What we're finding in banner ads, where the range of salience runs from, say, a low score of 20 to a high score of 80, when there's quite a broad range of about 60 points difference, that works less effectively than when you have a compressed range. So you might have a score running from 35 to 70. It's a narrower band score, but we have seen with our clients underlying click-through data that produces a better result. And it kind of consistent with human logic, because basically that's what Dragonfly does. It replicates human visual logic. It's helping us to basically see that we're making design that's easy to digest, simple to understand, and really clear in its sequencing.
So I can understand the value proposition from a perspective of where you're looking to drive action, say, for instance, a click on a button or a click to a link or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
How does it work with regard to, I don't know, checking blog pages to see whether the people are reading blog pages, whether they're pulling out the salient points? Does it do that, or is it purely around design?
No, it does all sorts. So we've got a Google Chrome extension, which allows us to run live web feeds through the Dragonfly interface and gives us an instant view of exactly how they're performing. I mean, that's a really powerful tool, and we're finding that a lot of our brands are getting very excited about that. Obviously, as the current circumstances with so much more digital traffic going on, they're really keen to ensure that, say, their SKUs are optimized before they're distributed into e-commerce environments. They're looking at how they're performing when they get there. They're looking at competitor content. So Dragonfly allows us to do all those things. And it's really literally at our fingertips. So very, very easy to use. The training takes probably no more than about an hour. At the end of that, you're pretty much ready to go. We have a motion analytics tool, which again we think is a differentiator, which allows us to analyze rich media, social feeds, video, TVCs, all that kind of thing, which is a very powerful tool to understand how our more deep media is working. And we have an API and an SDK, so we're beginning to look more at integrations into bigger production environments. So we've got a few fairly significant API projects running as we speak. I can't really go into much more detail, but other than to say that they will be phenomenally interesting and embedded into some of the world's biggest sort of performance data sources when they're complete. So we're very excited about those.
So many marketing departments are creating an enormous amount of content. And some of that content up until now has been, I suppose, wasted because people don't see it, they don't view it, they don't read it fully, or whatever it might be. I'm assuming with what Dragonfly AI can do, that can help rationalize some of that content production in the first place and therefore save costs. Are you promoting Dragonfly like that?
Yeah, certainly. So we have a very broad range of sort of users in our client portfolio, everything from visual merchandising to product pack design to off-shelf marketing, very significant in shop and marketing. We have some fantastic clients. I mean, GSK is a big and significant client for us, and we work with them globally. And yes, absolutely, what they're doing is they're using Dragonfly to help them to understand how to deliver the best result out of their content. Now, we can't see what they're doing with it, but testament to it is the kind of volume of lookups that they use. We can see that it's definitely being used with significant volume of analytics. And it helps basically to ensure that digital or basically any content is optimized before it publishes. That's really important to us. We think our big differentiator is the fact that we can instantly show you what human beings are going to see before you publish content. So you can use the tool to iterate that design. So, if you have got great digital, but some of the content is buried in design, or maybe the subjectivity that we apply to creativity, it requires us to take a sort of step back. Dragonfly helps us to do that so we can actually look at what's happening. If it's not delivering what we want it to do, then we can test and adjust and keep using the product. And the important part of ours is that we offer unlimited access, so there's no restriction on lookups. So you can test lots of principles. We know our algorithm is driven by certain neural pathways that the brain uses. So once you understand those, you can begin to use those neural pathways to create advantage in the development of creative design.
One of the areas where I think this may have some benefit, and hopefully you'll be able to answer this, is that many companies are spending thousands of pounds or dollars or whatever it might be in PPC. And that PPC is starting off with an ad in the section from Google, and then hopefully you'll get somebody to click and it goes to your landing page. Can you use Dragonfly AI to be able to differentiate your ad against other people's ads?
So the simple answer to that is yes. I mean, we do quite a lot of this. We're working with a couple of the digital broadcast channels at the moment, and they're very interested in. Obviously, they're having to create new formats for entertainment in particular, and launching, say, a film when you actually don't have a box office and you don't have cinemas to push it out through. So obviously, these are now online launches. What they're looking at is, their content, how it performs as they make it. So, they're creating what they believe is optimized and banner click-throughs or what have you. When it gets to destination, that content starts to change in terms of perception. And we see this in quite a lot of instances. You have basically a banner ad sitting on a page, which is related but not part of that page. Dragonfly will instantly show you whether it's getting attention or not. And not surprisingly, a lot of the pages that serve ads are designed to be, beautifully, created for consumers to digest. So the ads are significant to them, but they don't really want to detract too much from their own content to a degree. So we've got a situation where you can actually see the content you're producing and make sure that it's optimized before you publish it and press the button. You can see what it's going to do when it gets there, so you can set this stuff up and test it in site or in typical sort of site formats. And then you can see what else is happening on the page that may be acting to the detriment of the performance of the ad. So yeah, I mean, we can certainly help to optimize those PPC millions. And we do that in a number of instances. And again, typically we'll see, click-through improvements that are in excess of 5% normally. What we can't do is make a guarantee, because ultimately, at the end of the day, it's how you use Dragonfly yourself that's significant. It's a self-service product, but it does give you the wherewithal to make all of those judgments. So we talk about it, the 3 Cs, quite often. So content, that's your own content you're producing, making sure that's human ready. The context, where it's going to go. Obviously, in a number of instances, you might be thinking about, product SKUs that are ultimately going to go through a complex e-commerce environment. And then the third part of it is, very rarely does your product sit there on its own with a little glowing ring around it. What you have is a situation where you're in immediate competition with all of your key competitors, and they're also very good at what they do. So, the third C is looking at competitor products and seeing, if you can leverage yours against the competition you're likely to see when you're in those complex environments.
So, as a CRO vendor, we're always looking for new technologies to align with, and obviously to help our clients to be able to improve the success rate of their conversions. How do you see Dragonfly AI and, say, WebGens Optimize working together?
Well, I'd love us to have an opportunity to try some projects together. I think based on what I understand of what you do, which is all about, effectiveness of conversion from layout to colors and types, and basically, I guess your many years of experience in terms of providing these services and the technologies you have now developed to enable these, then I think we're probably a fairly obvious plug into the early stages of creativity in some of those. If you're looking at how page is performing or how content is performing, that we could certainly add value to that. And as I say, it's very simple. It's not really a jump out. It's just a case of it's almost like a kind of filter you run over the content as you're going through the process of design optimization. It's basically a sense check. It'll look at it and tell you whether what you're trying to achieve is being delivered or not. And if not, it allows you to then test and adjust until you've got it absolutely right.
Just one final question, going back to your CV, if you like. You've been in Dragonfly now for just nearly 3 years, I suppose,
Yes.
something like that. Is there another startup on the horizon for you, or do you think this is it?
What a brilliant question. No, we are fully committed to Dragonfly. We're contracted to be committed by our shareholders, and we've got a very exciting journey ahead of us. We think probably 3 to 5 years before we kind of take it to what we call Grand Central. So we have an aspirational plan, which is all about what we're in business to do, and what we want to do is basically to bring science to the world of creativity, and to prove that it can make a significant difference. As I said, I've done some really interesting sort of brand side roles, and looking at Dragonfly now, and I suppose I have got that slightly sort of rosy tinted view, is that I am a shareholder and a company owner, company director. But at the same time, I do think genuinely this is a piece of technology which is of huge value and makes a real fundamental difference. Very easy to use, very easy to deploy. So I'm committed to the journey. I've got a fantastic team. My co-founder David is brilliant. You've spoken to David, and we have some wonderful people in our business. So I think we're building a business in exactly the right way, bringing the right competencies. The journey ahead will not be without its bumps in the road. I mean, the COVID bump was a pretty significant one,
Yes.
and no one was really expecting that. But to be fair, we doubled down on building out our tech, so we put a lot of time and effort in the last 6 months into making sure our tech and usability is fantastic. So we've got a great team. We've got a fantastic proposition. We're talking to investors currently, and they're telling us we are a market-leading solution. So it's not just us saying that. Our clients are telling us they're getting great result from it. So all told, I mean, I think it's a journey that I'm very happy to be committed to, and I am, for the time being, John, parking any notion of new startups beyond this one. I think this is consuming phenomenal, and I think it's going to be an amazing journey.
Sounds an exciting ride. Mark, it's been very, very interesting looking back over your career when you were with the British Army and looking a little ahead towards what Dragonfly AI can deliver. I do wish you the best of luck in the future and hope at some point in time we can look back and see how successful Dragonfly was.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I really enjoyed talking to you, and we'll keep you posted.
Thanks a lot.